is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Violence in the Middle East. Thousands flee Jenin in the West Bank as an Israeli raid continues, while a car rams into pedestrians in Tel Aviv. Flights disrupted at a major Moscow airport. Russia accuses Ukraine of terrorism over multiple drone attacks. Ukraine claims fruitful gains on the war's front lines, but its president admits that progress has been difficult. And the United Nations says Japan can release water from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean, but controversy continues. Israel is continuing a large military operation in the West Bank with ground and air attacks in and around the Jenin refugee camp. 10 Palestinians are known to have died. Israel says the operation is aimed at uprooting Iranian-backed Palestinian factions and has arrested dozens of people. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Noor Harazin, who is in Gaza. So, Noor, what's the latest you're hearing from Jenin?
Well, this very intense military operation in Jenin enters its second day. All started overnight on Monday when Israeli drones targeted a home in central Jenin refugee camp. Since then and until now, while we're speaking, the this operation is still going on. Thousands of families in the refugee camp of Jenin had to evacuate their homes, taking shelter and going to nearby schools or hospitals. At the same time, there is hundreds of families in Jenin that are still trapped in their homes with no food or water, and this what sparked anger among Palestinians in the West Bank and also in Gaza. The Palestinian president has asked the Arab League for an urgent meeting to be held in Cairo this evening. Palestinian militant factions here in Gaza, and we're speaking about Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, they threatened that if the Israeli operation continues in Jenin, that they will escalate from their side, meaning by firing rockets from Gaza. And for them, this is a way to show, for the Palestinians in Gaza, to show their support for the other half of Palestine in Jenin.
Israel says their operation is now nearly complete. Can we expect things to calm down soon?
Well, this is what the Palestinians on the ground are hoping for. However, if we're talking about what is happening on the ground, actually this operation in Jenin sparked anger among Palestinians. So clashes erupted in other cities and in different cities in the West Bank, in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Hebron, in East Jerusalem. Also, this afternoon, there was a run-over attack that was carried by a Palestinian in Tel Aviv. According to the Israeli media, several Israelis were injured. So this could take few days for the things to calm down and everything to get back to normal. Palestinians are hoping that this operation will end soon. However, what is happening on the ground is telling us that this could take a few extra days.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Noor Harazin in Gaza. 8 people have been injured, 3 of them seriously, in a car and knife attack in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv. The suspect was shot dead by a civilian. Israeli police say he's thought to be a Palestinian from the occupied West Bank. He's said to have rammed his car into pedestrians before getting out and stabbing others. Palestinian militant group Hamas described the attack as heroic and said it was a natural response to Israel's operation in the West Bank. Restrictions at one of Moscow's main airports have now been lifted after international flights were diverted due to a drone attack on the Russian capital. The Kremlin has blamed Ukraine, saying at least 5 drones attacked the city, all of which was shot down without causing damage or injury. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. So, Dasha, what's Russia saying about this drone attack?
Well, according to Russia's Ministry of Defense, 4 drones have been shot down and another one has been jammed as they were trying to attack the targets in Moscow and in the Moscow region. Now, we understand the last one that has been jammed has fallen down in the Odintsovo district in the Moscow region. No casualties or damage has been reported, but Moscow calls that an act of terrorism, saying that the Ukrainian regime, as Moscow describes it, has been trying to attack the area where the civilian infrastructure is located. Russia's Ministry of Defense has also, Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Maria Zakharova has also commented on the matter, saying that the Ukrainian authorities knew that there was the Vnukovo airport located nearby, and that's why it was purely an act of terrorism. She was also saying that the international community has to realize that 3 countries, the US, the UK and France, were sponsoring the terrorist regime of Vladimir Zelensky. In her words, she said those countries knew what they were doing while providing more weapons to Kyiv. And also we have heard from the Kremlin when asked to comment on this matter. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said what was important was that those drones have been either destroyed or neutralized. But at the same time, we have heard from the Moscow authorities also saying that they have allocated a grant to Almaz company to improve air defense systems, including the drone detection tools around the capital. So certainly Russia is learning the lessons, because this is not the first time that Moscow is being attacked by the drones.
Meanwhile, President Putin attending a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. What's he said there about the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, indeed, the Russian president has once again said that the all-encompassing war has been waged against Russia, the so-called hybrid war by the Western states. He was also saying that for years, the Western governments and the outside forces have been trying to create the so-called anti-Russia in Ukraine, to create security challenges for Russia. But he also said that Russia was resilient. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
I would like to point out that Russia is confidently resisting and will continue to resist external pressure, sanctions and provocations. In the current environment, our country continues to develop steadily. The Russian people are consolidated as never before.
So indeed, the Russian president has said that the Russian society was consolidated as never before, including the Russian elites, including the army, as well as the Russian nationals and citizens all around the country, saying that they all understand the threats and challenges that the country was facing. And he also thanked the SCO member states for the support they have shown to the Russian leadership during the uprising by the Wagner Group earlier this summer.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Ukraine says its troops are regaining more ground on eastern and southern front lines. Kyiv's counter-offensive has met strong resistance from Russian forces, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky describing last week as difficult. Russia says its forces are continuing to repel Ukrainian attacks. Well, our correspondent Stephanie Fried is in the Donetsk region in Ukraine. Stephanie, intense fighting continuing in eastern and southern parts of the country.
That's right, Robin. Intense fighting, but despite the fact that Ukrainian officials are saying that they're making progress, it's limited. And they are saying that as well. And that's what we're understanding also from those who are gathering intel from, let's say, images that they're seeing, the information that they're getting. Intense fighting around the Bakhmut area, which is a few hundred kilometers from here. And also in the south, Zaporizhia areas. Also, we understand that a missile was fired on Kherson, also in the south. 2 people, Ukrainian civilians, were killed. A swarm of drones, or 22 Iranian-made Shahed drones, according to Ukraine officials, fired also in the south. Ukraine says that they intercepted 16 of those. Right now, our understanding is Ukraine is, their focus is on the trenches, hitting Russian trenches, as well as reinforcements. And it is, again, I'm saying it again, it's going slowly. Now, trench and the infantry positions versus artillery positions, somewhat less intense. And in the immediate vicinity where we are right now, what we've been told is the people that are manning artillery positions, they're holding those positions. They're not actively on the offensive. It's more on the defensive, trying to hold positions. We visited frontline artillery positions, and basically the people are trying to keep the morale up. They're trying to be conservative with their ammunition. Let's take a look. The Hyacinth 152mm cannon and Grad multi-rocket launcher are both Soviet-made. Ukraine's army uses them to fire on Russian positions 10 kilometers away. This Grad launcher is capable of firing 40 rockets in 20 seconds. Conservation is key. Right now, they're only firing 2. Ukraine's president and military chief are openly calling for fighter jets and more artillery.
There's a lack of ammunition. For now, most of the ammunition goes to the advancing brigades, more in the Zaporizhzhia direction. We are holding the line here.
The Ukraine Army's Donetsk artillery front line is located in open fields punctuated by tree lines. Camouflaged beneath the foliage, soldiers, trenches, and weapons. Some mobile, others stationary. The mobile Grad launcher moves out, fires, and rapidly returns to the grove. Time is of the essence. Once a unit like this has fired, it's got to get back under cover as quickly as possible because now it's a target. Ukraine's commanders say Russia's use of superior weapons like the 120-kilometer range 300mm Smerch gives Russia's army the advantage. Nonetheless, Russia is reportedly targeting the howitzer because, according to U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin, it is absolutely lethal.
Yesterday, 7 Grad rockets and 3 152 howitzers were fired on us.
Flat terrain, ammunition shortages, and holding static positions render artillery units vulnerable, but not incapable. And what was interesting in speaking with the members of the 59th Brigade, those artillery units that you just saw, they all, or most of them, had moved from the south, fighting in Mykolaiv, Kherson. After Russia evacuated that area, or they pushed them back, now they're closer to this area. And again, they're holding their positions. Robin?
Stephanie, thank you very much for that. That's our correspondent, Stephanie Fried, in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg will remain NATO's Secretary General for another year. Former Norwegian Prime Minister has been leader of the Transatlantic Security Alliance since 2014. His tenure as leader has already been extended 3 times. The decision brings continuity to NATO's leadership as its 31 member states grapple with the challenge of Russia's military action in Ukraine. 4 people have been killed and 2 children injured after being shot in Philadelphia in the United States. A 40-year-old man who does not appear to be connected to the victims has been taken into custody. 3 guns were recovered from the scene. A second person has also been arrested in connection with the shooting. French President Emmanuel Macron has met mayors of 220 cities affected by riots. Around 99 town halls have been attacked in the last week as waves of violence swept the country. The French government has been battling riots and looting since the police shooting of a teenager in suburban Paris a week ago. That violence has now begun to ease. There were only 72 arrests on Monday night, less than half the number on Sunday. The United Nations nuclear watchdog has given the go-ahead for Japan's plan to release treated radioactive water from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean. After a 2-year review, the IAEA says discharging the 1.3 million tonnes of treated water would have a negligible radiological impact on people and the environment. The water was contaminated when the plant was hit by a powerful earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Our correspondent Terry Terashima reports.
This may be the moment the Japanese government was waiting for. The IAEA Final Safety Review has concluded that Japan's plan to release contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean is consistent with IAEA safety standards. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi personally handed the comprehensive assessment to Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Although the IAEA said the report is only an objective review, the Japanese government is hoping to use this to gain credibility and an endorsement to discharge the treated radioactive water.
Japan will continue to provide explanations to the Japanese people and to the international community in a sincere manner, based on scientific evidence and with a high level of transparency.
Rafael Grossi said if Japan plans to go ahead with the discharge of the contaminated water, the IAEA will maintain its presence and continue to monitor the process and set up an office within the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant.
The IAEA will have a continued presence at the site, will continue the review if the plan moves forward, because, as you know, this is a decision by the government. It's not the IAEA decision, it's a decision by the government of Japan. If the government decides to proceed with it, the IAEA will be permanently here, reviewing, monitoring, assessing this activity for decades to come.
Over 1.3 million tons of contaminated water accumulated at the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has been treated through an advanced liquid processing system to remove radionuclides, but it still contains some amounts of radioactive tritium. The discharge plan has drawn protests from the Japanese public and some international groups. Grossi also plans to visit South Korea, the Cook Islands and New Zealand to explain the IAEA's final assessment.
Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said he will carefully review the IAEA's report and make decisions regarding the release of the contaminated water. Terrace Hiroshima, CGTN, Tokyo.
China has repeated calls for the release of water from the Fukushima plant to be suspended. The country's ambassador to Japan says many questions still need answering.
For such a long-lasting discharge, who will monitor it? How will it be monitored? And how will the credibility of monitoring be guaranteed? None of these issues have reached a conclusion. Our request is very simple, that Japan should suspend the plan to release the water into the sea, carefully negotiate with the international community and jointly explore a scientific, safe, transparent handling method, which is agreed by all parties.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization gets a new member. Iran joins China, Russia, India and Pakistan at a summit of world leaders.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Violence in the Middle East. Thousands flee Jenin in the West Bank as an Israeli raid continues, while a car rams into pedestrians in Tel Aviv. Flights disrupted at a major Moscow airport. Russia accuses Ukraine of terrorism over multiple drone attacks. And the United Nations says Japan can release water from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the ocean. The controversy continues. China's President Xi Jinping has called for efforts to safeguard regional peace and ensure common security in an address to leaders of Asian nations. They're taking part in a virtual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, hosted by India. The group, formed in 2001, is a political and security union of countries spanning much of Eurasia, including China, India and Russia. Well, our correspondent Zheng Chunying is in Beijing. So what else did President Xi have to say?
Oh, thank you. Chinese President Xi Jinping, during his address at the SCO summit, stressed the need for unity and cooperation and called for regional leaders to take charge of their own country's futures, and also pledged to work with SCO member states to oppose protectionism, unilateral sanctions, and extension of the national security concept in a bid to accelerate the regional economic recovery. He also proposed the establishment of the organization's own development bank and to promote digital currency cooperation. In addition to that, President Xi also called for strengthening cooperation on the Belt and Road Initiative, trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, and for acceleration of port infrastructure and development as well. He said more efforts are needed to construct international logistic channels in order to ensure stable and smooth supply chains for regional industries. He also invited all parties of the SCO to the Belt and Road International Cooperation Summit Forum, which is expected to be held later this year to jointly ensure the initiative benefits the world wider and further. That's all from me. Back to you.
There were some other talking points at the summit, weren't there, including Russia and Iran. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, as you just mentioned, one of the highlights is, of course, the Putin's speech, because that is his first appearance at an international forum since the Wagner fallout. He said that the Moscow planned to boost ties with SCO and supported the transition to local currencies for trade settlement. He also warned that the potential for conflicts and the risk of global economic crisis were on the rise. And also Putin thanked the member of the SCO group who he said had expressed their support for his efforts to protect the constitutional order, the lives and the security of citizens, and also told them that Russia would stand up against Western pressure, sanctions, and provocations imposed over Russia-Ukraine conflict. And another biggest highlight, of course, is the Iran's inclusion. As we know that the organization has officially ushered in Iran as its new member, and that expansion is very significant because that means for the first time the organization has extended its influence to the Persian Gulf region, which is a landmark for the future advancement of the SCO. And according to an expert that I've spoken to, the SCO and Iran are expected to form an interactive and win-win situation where both sides can shape each other, realizing mutual development. When it comes to China-Iran ties, as we know that the two sides has formed a comprehensive strategic partnership, and it is widely believed that this relationship will also be strengthened under the SCO framework in the future. That's all from me. Back to you.
Chunying, thank you. That's our correspondent Zheng Chunying. China has expressed willingness to work with the European Union on climate change and environmental cooperation. Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang has been meeting the Executive Vice President of the European Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, in Beijing. The EU is calling for faster and more decisive global action to tackle the climate crisis. Well, our Europe correspondent, Alex Cadier, is in Paris. So, Alex, how significant is China-EU cooperation on climate change?
Well, Robin, it's very significant in a word, because actually it's one of the few areas in which these two economic superpowers, these two blocs, want to work together and are very clear that they want to work together and they get along. We heard from Frans Timmermans, the climate change chief for the European Commission, talking about wanting to see decisive joint action with China. That was what he said in his speech just a few hours ago, and saying that humanity is confronted with a triple crisis of global warming, the loss of biodiversity and pollution. Those are three things that the European Union and European officials who are speaking to me behind the scenes tell me they are very eager to work with China and see that as an opportunity to cooperate really for the good of the world and for a global improvement. That is why these conversations are so crucial, why it's so important for Frans Timmermans to go to China to meet with Chinese leaders. He was supposed to go back in April, but cancelled that trip as a result or because of a positive COVID test. Now let's have a look at some of the elements of that speech by Frans Timmermans on the importance of that cooperation. Frans Timmermans saying climate change, the climate crisis, is not European and it's not Chinese. We all live under the same sun and share the same atmosphere. The EU and China must therefore work together to strengthen international action to protect our climate, to secure a safe and thriving planet for future generations. EU-China cooperation can inspire a real change.
And Alex, what did the EU Vice President have to say specifically about China?
Well, Frans Timmermans was there in part to build bridges, to have that cooperation I was just discussing, but also to urge China to do a little bit more, because it is, like the EU, like the United States, one of the biggest polluters in the world. It has a responsibility. That is something that Frans Timmermans has laid out, not just for China, but also for US counterparts, saying that these big polluters, these big post-industrialized nations have a responsibility to the rest of the world to clean up their act. There was some criticism, for example, from Frans Timmermans of China for building up their coal power capacity. Having said that, he also conceded he understands why China would do that for fear of or with a desire to avoid blackouts around the country. So it's finding that balance, trying to find that way to work together. And we saw the European Council just last week where the EU member states agreed their position on China. There was quite a lot of criticism, notably on China's position on the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. That was one of the issues. Now, there was also a note of working together on climate change, on biodiversity. And let's again have a look of an extract from that speech by Frans Timmermans in China. He said China emits between a quarter and a third of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. This means that humanity and ecosystems on this planet cannot survive without China's ambitious emissions reductions, and many in China, as a great beneficiary of the International Trading Order, are aware of China's responsibility when it comes to the green transition. So it's very much about building bridges, building that relationship, finding that common ground. Biodiversity, climate change, something that China and the EU can and very much want to work together on.
Alex, thank you very much, our correspondent Alex Cadier. The world's most expensive footballer, Neymar, has been fined more than $3 million for breaching environmental rules. Authorities in Brazil say the fine relates to the construction of an artificial lake at his luxury coastal mansion, which is being built in the country. The Brazilian player has declined to comment. The world's oldest tennis tournament is underway, London's famous Wimbledon, which this year features a record 9 players from the Chinese mainland. Like pretty much any other tennis player, they'll probably be very happy to emulate the achievements of Roger Federer. He's been appearing on centre court to be honoured in a special ceremony. The Swiss Grand Slam winner retired last year with a record 8 Wimbledon titles to his name. A reminder of our headlines. Violence in the Middle East. Thousands flee Jenin in the West Bank as an Israeli raid continues, while a car rams into pedestrians in Tel Aviv. Flights disrupted at a major Moscow airport. Russia accuses Ukraine of terrorism over multiple drone attacks. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.